A heartbroken single dad gave his last bit of food to a billionaire's hungry baby, unaware that its mother was the powerful CEO who had just fired him. "You have 1 week to vacate the premises." The relentless hammering of the rain against the flimsy window pane was a cruel percussion to the landlord's final, sterile words, each one a nail in the coffin of Leo's dwindling hope. He stood in the doorway of his cramped apartment, the eviction notice a brittle, damning piece of paper in his trembling hand, watching the landlord's stout figure retreat down the dimly lit, water-stained hallway until it was swallowed by the shadows. The soft click of the stairwell door closing echoed with an unbearable finality. He was alone. The biting cold of the room seemed to seep into his very bones. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather and everything to do with the hollow cavern that had opened up in his chest. Lightning flashed, a silent, skeletal flicker that momentarily illuminated the threadbare rug, the worn sofa with its faded floral pattern, and the small, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A picture of his late wife, Maria, her smile so full of life it felt like a ghost in the desolate silence of the room. He closed his eyes, the image of her seared behind his lids, a sacred, painful memory that was both his anchor and his torment. It had been 2 years since the illness had stolen her from him, leaving behind only the scent of her favorite lavender soap on a worn blanket and their daughter, Lily, a perfect, miniature version of her mother's light. She was everything. He moved through the small living space, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the creaking floorboards, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him. In the corner, a small crib stood as a monument to his love and his failure. Lily was asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady, innocent rhythm, her tiny face serene in the amber hue cast by a single flickering lamp. A soft rattle, shaped like a smiling sun, was clutched in her hand. He watched her, and a wave of profound, desperate love washed over him, so powerful it was physically painful. It was a love that demanded he be strong, that he provide, that he protect her from the harsh realities that were now pounding at their door. But his strength felt like a shattered mirror, reflecting only fragmented pieces of the man he used to be. The man who had been a celebrated sous chef at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, his hands capable of creating art from simple ingredients. The man who could always make Maria laugh. The man who had a future. He was gone. Now, he was just a man with a final paycheck that was barely enough for a week's worth of diapers and baby formula. A man unjustly fired by a heartless boss, Mr. Abernathy, over a lie, a petty accusation of stealing premium ingredients that was just an excuse to promote his own nephew. Leo had been too proud, too dignified to beg. He had simply packed his knives, his worn uniform, and the last vestiges of his professional pride, and walked out into the cold, unforgiving city. His savings had vanished, eaten away by rent and medicine for Lily's persistent cough. The cupboards were a testament to his desperation, holding little more than a half-empty box of oatmeal and a few lonely tea bags. His heart thudded a heavy, weary rhythm against his ribs. He had failed her. A soft whimper came from the crib, and Lily stirred, her small brow furrowed in a dream. He moved to her side instantly, his large, calloused hand gently stroking her fine, dark hair. The warmth of her small body was a comfort, a tiny, burning star in his vast, cold darkness. He felt a sob catch in his throat, a raw, unspoken sound of pure despair. He could not let her see his fear. He had to be her rock, her steady, unwavering shield against the storm. He straightened his shoulders, his jaw clenching with a quiet resolve that felt brittle but was all he had left. He would find a way. He had to, for her. He would walk the streets, wash dishes, sweep floors. Anything to keep that innocent, peaceful sleep on her face. He didn't know it yet, but the city held more than just hardship. It held a single, fragile chance, a moment of connection that was destined to change everything. His gaze fell upon the small, insulated bottle on the counter, containing the last of the fresh milk he had managed to buy. It was for Lily's breakfast tomorrow. It was all that was left. Total silence. The next morning, the city awoke to a heavy fog that clung to the skyscrapers like a damp, gray shroud, muffling the sounds of traffic into a distant, mournful hum. Leo wrapped Lily in her thickest blanket, a faded pink one Maria had knitted, and placed her gently in the worn stroller. The air was crisp and biting, but he knew she needed the fresh air, and he needed the illusion of purpose that came with walking among the living. He had spent the night applying for dozens of menial jobs online, his hope dwindling with each unacknowledged application. The eviction notice felt like a lead weight in his pocket. He had one goal for the day: find a soup kitchen that would give him something warm for Lily, and perhaps a piece of bread for himself. His own hunger was a dull, familiar ache he had learned to ignore. He pushed the stroller through the sprawling city park, the damp leaves sticking to the wheels. The park was an oasis of green and gold, a stark contrast to the gray concrete that defined his life. Children's laughter echoed from a distant playground, a sound that was both beautiful and painful. He steered the stroller towards a quiet, secluded bench overlooking a small pond, wanting to give Lily a moment of peace before their grim search for a meal began. He sat down, the cold of the iron seeping through his thin jacket, and watched the ducks glide across the water's surface with a grace he could not fathom. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching the world from behind a thick pane of glass. He was a ghost in his own life. It was then that he heard it, a sound that cut through the soft hush of the park, the sharp, desperate wail of a baby. His head snapped up. A few benches away, a woman was struggling with a crying infant. She was dressed in simple, almost threadbare clothes, a plain gray coat, a dark woolen hat pulled down low over her face, and her posture was one of sheer, unadulterated panic. She fumbled with a large, empty-looking designer bag, her movements frantic and jerky. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent, a sound that resonated deep within Leo's paternal soul. He knew that cry. It was the raw, piercing sound of pure hunger. He watched her for a moment, his own problems momentarily forgotten. Her face, pale and gaunt in the gray light, was a mask of anguish. She looked utterly lost. A moment of internal hesitation seized him. He had so little. The small, insulated bottle tucked into the side of his stroller contained the last of Lily's milk, warmed just enough for her next feeding. It was a precious commodity, a symbol of his last ability to provide. Giving it away felt like an impossible sacrifice. His mind screamed at him to look away, to protect his own, to hoard the little he had left. The world had given him no charity. Why should he offer any? But then he looked at Lily, sleeping soundly, her belly full from her morning oatmeal, and then back at the wailing, red-faced infant in the stranger's arms. The sound of its suffering was a physical blow. His inherent goodness, the part of him that Maria had always loved, won the battle against his desperation. He couldn't just sit there. He couldn't. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and approached her. The woman flinched as he drew near, her eyes, hollow and haunted, darting towards him with a flicker of fear. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet, gentle, so as not to startle her further. I heard your baby." He gestured with his head towards the crying child. "Is he hungry? I have some warm milk. If you need it." He held out the small bottle, a humble offering that cost him more than she could ever know. The narration of his own internal monologue emphasized the personal cost. This was Lily's security, her comfort, her next meal, and he was giving it to a complete stranger. It was an act of pure, selfless compassion in a world that had shown him none. He held his breath. The woman froze. Her frantic movements ceased, and she simply stared at the bottle in his hand as if it were a hallucination. Her eyes, which he now saw were a startling, piercing shade of blue, widened in stunned silence. A seismic shift seemed to occur behind them, a profound, life-altering impact that shattered the icy fortress she had built around her heart. For a long, silent moment, the only sounds were the baby's ragged sobs and the distant city hum. This man, this stranger who looked as worn and desperate as she felt, was offering her his child's food. In her world of transactions, of calculated favors and corporate ruthlessness, such an act of unsolicited kindness was so alien it felt like a miracle. It was a single drop of pure water on the barren landscape of her grief. A tear she hadn't realized was forming slipped down her pale cheek. I forgot his formula at the store," she whispered. Her voice cracked and raw. "I was distracted. She didn't need to finish. He understood. He simply nodded and pushed the bottle gently into her hand. "It's okay," he said. "We all have those days." She took the bottle, her fingers brushing his. Her hand was ice cold. Without another word, she quickly began to feed her hungry son, whose cries immediately softened into contented gurgles. The relief that washed over her face was so immense it was almost painful to witness. She looked up at Leo, her eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. 1,000 words seemed to pass between them in that silent, shared gaze. "Thank you," she finally managed to say, the 2 words carrying the weight of a lifetime of loneliness. He just gave her a small, sad smile and retreated to his bench, leaving an open loop of connection hanging in the cold air. She was gone. The brief moment of connection in the park vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Leo with an empty bottle and an even emptier feeling in the pit of his stomach. The reality of his situation crashed back down on him with renewed force. He had given away Lily's next meal. The weight of that decision was heavy, a mixture of quiet pride in his own humanity and the gnawing fear of a parent who cannot provide. He pushed the stroller back towards their apartment building, the wheels seeming to drag against the pavement, each rotation a reminder of the ticking clock on their eviction. When he arrived, another crisp white envelope was taped to his door. His heart plummeted. He expected another warning, another threat from the landlord. With trembling fingers, he tore it open. It wasn't from the landlord. It was a final notice from the utility company. The power would be shut off in 24 hours. The notice was a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from his lungs. He leaned against the peeling paint of the hallway wall, his head bowed in defeat. It was one thing to be homeless. It was another to be cold and in the dark. How could he warm Lily's food? How could he keep her safe in a city that was growing colder with each passing day? The walls of the hallway felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the smell of damp and decay. He felt a profound sense of hopelessness, a deep, dark well of despair that threatened to swallow him whole. He had tried so hard. He had worked tirelessly, saved diligently, loved fiercely. And for what? To be brought to this, a point of utter, complete ruin. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, the cold linoleum a stark reminder of his failure. The world was a brutal, unforgiving place. His one small act of kindness felt foolish now, a naive gesture in a world that only rewarded selfishness. He had given his last resource to a stranger and was now facing the immediate, dire consequences. He felt shattered. Meanwhile, across the city, Serafina sat in the back of a gleaming, sleek black car, the sterile silence of the leather-clad interior a world away from the foggy park. Her son, Gabriel, was asleep in his state-of-the-art car seat, his belly full, his face peaceful. The simple gray coat and woolen hat were gone, replaced by an impeccably tailored business suit of dark charcoal. The gaunt, desperate woman from the park had vanished, replaced by the commanding, powerful CEO of a global empire. But inside, she was still reeling. The encounter with the kind stranger had splintered the thick ice that had encased her heart since her husband's death. His selfless act, the simple, quiet dignity with which he had offered his own child's food, had reawakened a part of her she thought was long dead. It was a sign of purity in a transactional world, a flicker of light in her profound darkness. Her grief over her husband's sudden passing had made her cynical, cold, and detached. She saw everyone as having an angle, a motive. But this man, he had no motive. He expected nothing. He simply saw a need and met it at his own expense. It was a revelation. A new purpose began to form in her mind, sharp and clear. She would not let that act of kindness go unrewarded. She would not allow a world that contained such goodness to crush the man who embodied it. It was more than just a desire to repay a debt. It was a desperate need to prove to herself that such virtue could and should survive. She picked up her crisp, state-of-the-art smartphone, her fingers flying across the screen. "Harrison," she said, her voice low and firm, speaking to her head of security through the encrypted line. "I need you to find someone for me. A man. He was in Central Park this morning, near the pond. He has a young daughter in a worn pink stroller. Find him. I want to know everything about him, but you will be discreet. He is not to know he is being watched." She disconnected the call, her blue eyes unwavering, fixed on the rain-streaked window. A quiet observation was about to begin. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next few days were a strange, bewildering dream for Leo. Just as he was about to sell his late wife's locket, the one thing he had left of her, an anonymous envelope appeared under his door. Inside was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, enough to cover his rent for 3 months and then some. There was no note, no explanation, just the money. He stared at it, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. He called his landlord, who confirmed a charitable foundation had anonymously paid his back rent and covered the next quarter. The next day, he received a call from the utility company. A pleasant-sounding woman informed him there had been a clerical error on his account and that his balance was, in fact, paid in full for the remainder of the year. He froze. Then came the food. A delivery truck from an upscale organic grocery service pulled up outside his building. The driver, citing a promotional giveaway for his address, unloaded box after box of fresh fruit, vegetables, milk, meat, and high-quality baby formula. The cupboards, once bare, were suddenly overflowing. Leo stood in the middle of his kitchen, surrounded by this inexplicable bounty, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal of his fortune. It felt like a mistake, a miracle, a dream from which he would soon wake up. He held Lily in his arms, her small body warm against his, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a fragile, cautious sense of relief. Someone, somewhere, was watching over them. An angel, a hidden savior. He had no idea how close to the truth he was. He didn't know that from a discreet black car parked down the street, a pair of piercing blue eyes was watching him, a small, sad smile playing on the lips of the woman he knew only as a desperate stranger in the park. Her secret intervention was complete. For now, Serafina knew that anonymous charity was not enough. The money, the food, those were temporary fixes for material problems. What had struck her about the man in the park was not his poverty, but his spirit. She had seen a deep sadness in his eyes, a familiar haunted look that mirrored her own. She had seen the profound grief of a soul who had lost its other half. She felt an undeniable pull, a need to connect with him, to understand the source of his quiet strength. She had to see him again. Orchestrating a chance encounter was simple for a woman with her resources. Her team had identified his daily routine. A walk with his daughter in the same small, local playground every afternoon, weather permitting. It was a humble, quiet place, far from the polished, sterile parks her own social circle frequented. It was perfect. She dressed down again, not in the threadbare disguise of their first meeting, but in the comfortable, unassuming clothes of an ordinary mom. Jeans, a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wanted him to see her, not the billionaire. She took Gabriel to the playground, her heart thudding with an unfamiliar mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She saw him almost immediately, sitting on a bench, pushing Lily gently on the swings. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow around them, making the scene look like a faded, treasured photograph. He looked less weary than before. The sharp edges of his desperation softened, but the deep sadness in his eyes remained. She took a deep breath and walked towards him, pushing Gabriel's stroller. He looked up as she approached, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. His eyes widened slightly. He remembered her. "Hello again," she said, her voice softer than she intended. I never got to properly thank you for what you did in the park." Leo stood up, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "It was nothing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm glad I could help. Your son. Is he okay?" He looked at Gabriel, who was cooing happily in his stroller. "He's perfect," she said, her gaze softening. "Thanks to you." An awkward but not unpleasant silence settled between them. It was a quiet, safe space, the air filled with the gentle sounds of the playground. "I'm Leo," he said finally, extending a hand. "And this is Lily." "I'm Serafina," she replied, taking his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "And this is Gabriel." They stood there for a moment, two single parents, two lonely souls, connected by a single act of kindness and a shared, unspoken grief. She gestured to the bench. "May I?" He nodded, and they sat, their children's strollers side by side. The conversation started slowly, cautiously, revolving around the universal topics of parenthood. Sleep schedules, feeding habits, the tiny, miraculous milestones. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, the conversation deepened. She found herself telling him about the crushing loneliness of her life, not mentioning her wealth, but speaking of the emotional emptiness, the feeling of being an island. He listened with unwavering, steady eyes, creating a feeling of being truly seen, of being understood without judgment. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy advice. He just listened. Then, in the soft hush of the twilight, he began to speak. He told her about Maria, about their love story, about the vibrant, fierce way she lived her life before the illness took her. He spoke of the hollow echo her absence had left in their small apartment, in his heart. His voice cracked, and a single tear traced a path down his worn face. He shared his tragic backstory in a vulnerable monologue, not for pity, but as a simple statement of fact, a sharing of a burden that had become too heavy to carry alone. Serafina felt her own carefully constructed walls crumble. His pain was her pain. His loss was her loss. She instinctively reached out and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a simple, empathetic gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, his eyes glistening in the fading light, and saw not a stranger, but a fellow traveler on the lonely road of grief. Emboldened by his vulnerability, she found herself reciprocating, sharing her own tragedy. She told him about her husband, Richard, a brilliant architect with a passion for life, killed in a sudden, senseless car accident just weeks after Gabriel was born. She spoke of the sterile silence in her large, empty house, of the friends who didn't know how to talk to her anymore, of the unbearable weight of raising a son who would never know his father. They forged a bond over their shared grief, two shattered hearts finding a strange sort of comfort in their mutual brokenness. The scene ended not with a romantic touch, but with that simple, profound moment of human connection. Her hand still on his shoulder, a silent promise that neither of them was truly alone anymore. They had found each other. Their friendship blossomed in the quiet afternoons at the playground. They met almost daily, their conversations becoming the anchor in both their lives. For Leo, Serafina was a breath of fresh air, a kind soul who saw him for who he was, not for his circumstances. He felt his spirit slowly mending, the hope that had been so fragile now taking root. Buoyed by this newfound confidence and the security of his mysteriously solved financial problems, he decided it was time to reclaim his life, his career. He polished his resume, his chef's knives, and his professional pride. He learned of a grand new luxury hotel, the St. Regis Astoria, that was opening downtown. They were hiring for all positions, including a head chef for their flagship restaurant. It was a long shot, a massive leap of faith, but he had to try. For Lily, for himself. He told Serafina about the interview. She encouraged him with a sincere, warm smile, telling him that any restaurant would be lucky to have him. She didn't let on that her own company, Sterling Vale Enterprises, was the sole owner of the St. Regis Astoria. She wanted him to earn this on his own merits. She knew he was more than qualified. She had Harrison discreetly pull his professional records, which were filled with glowing recommendations and accolades from every position he'd held before his last one. She was certain this would be his triumphant return. She had no idea who the hotel had hired as their lead consultant for the restaurant's launch. Leo walked into the cavernous, ornate lobby of the St. Regis Astoria, feeling a nervous flutter in his chest. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and polished marble. It was a world of gleaming surfaces and crisp uniforms, a world he had once belonged to. He approached the concierge desk, his worn but clean suit feeling inadequate under the bright, recessed lighting. He gave his name and stated he was there for the head chef interview. The concierge directed him to a waiting area in the main lobby, a plush collection of velvet chairs and mahogany tables. As he sat, his gaze swept the lobby, and his blood ran cold. Standing near the entrance to the restaurant, clipboard in hand and barking orders at a group of nervous-looking staff, was Mr. Abernathy, his former boss. The man who had ruined him. He froze. Mr. Abernathy turned, his cold, reptilian eyes scanning the lobby, and they landed on Leo. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He strode over, his polished shoes clicking menacingly on the marble floor. "Well, well, well," he sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Leo Sterling. I should have known a rat like you would scurry out of his hole at the smell of money." Leo's face paled, but he stood up, his posture dignified. "Mr. Abernathy," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "I'm here for an interview." This was the beginning of the public humiliation, the attack by the antagonist. Abernathy let out a short, barking laugh. "An interview? For what? Janitor? Don't be ridiculous. You're a thief and a failure. Did you really think you could get a job in a place like this after I fired you?" The lobby had grown quiet. Guests and staff were turning to watch the unfolding drama. Leo was visibly overwhelmed, his face flushed with shame, but he held his ground. "I was not a thief," he said, his voice low but firm. "You know that." Abernathy stepped closer, his face contorted in a mask of elitist rage. "I know you're a worthless, pathetic excuse for a chef who belongs in a soup kitchen, not a fine dining establishment. You do not belong here," he hissed, jabbing a finger into Leo's chest. "Now get out before I have security throw you out." He felt the eyes of everyone on him, their gazes a mixture of pity and contempt. He was about to turn and leave, his last shred of hope completely splintered, when a calm, commanding voice cut through the heavy silence. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Abernathy." The voice was cool, clear, and carried an undeniable authority. Everyone turned. Serafina stood at the top of the grand staircase, her simple mom clothes gone, replaced by a stunning, impeccably tailored power suit of royal blue. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She descended the stairs with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes, as sharp and cold as blue diamonds, fixed on Abernathy. This was her dramatic entrance, calm but powerful. The entire hotel staff seemed to snap to attention, their eyes wide with shock and deference. Leo stared, his mind unable to reconcile the kind, gentle woman from the park with this commanding, powerful figure. She came to a stop beside Leo, placing a gentle hand on his arm, a public gesture of alignment and protection. She turned her unwavering gaze back to Abernathy, who was now pale and trembling. "I am Serafina Vale, CEO of Sterling Vale Enterprises," she announced, her voice echoing in the now silent, cavernous lobby. "We own this hotel, and you, Mr. Abernathy, are trespassing on my property." She delivered her powerful monologue, revealing her identity and defending Leo's character. "I am aware of your history with Mr. Sterling. I am also aware that you fired him on false pretenses to hire your incompetent nephew, a fact my legal team has thoroughly documented. You are a petty, cruel man who confuses power with bullying." Abernathy opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was speechless. Serafina's voice softened as she turned to Leo, but it was still loud enough for all to hear. "Leo Sterling is one of the most talented, honest, and dignified men I have ever had the privilege of knowing. He is a man of immense character and integrity." She then turned her icy gaze back to Abernathy and the stunned onlookers. She publicly offered Leo protection, wealth, and status, completely reversing the power dynamic. "And as of this moment, he is the new executive head chef, not just of this restaurant, but of the entire St. Regis Astoria hotel chain, with full creative control and a salary that reflects his immense talent. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Mr. Abernathy, your consulting contract is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. If you ever come near Mr. Sterling or any of my properties again, I will ruin you. The reversal was total. The antagonist was vanquished, left utterly speechless and humiliated. Leo just stared at her, his heart pounding, his world turned completely upside down. He was saved. The aftermath of the lobby confrontation was a blur of motion and sound for Leo. Security guards, previously observing with detached interest, materialized and firmly, yet quietly, escorted a sputtering, ashen-faced Mr. Abernathy out of the hotel. The hushed whispers of the staff and guests turned into a low, respectful buzz. The hotel manager, a man who had been watching the scene unfold with barely concealed panic, rushed forward, bowing slightly to Serafina and offering Leo a profuse, stammering apology. But Leo barely heard him. His entire focus was on the woman standing beside him, the woman who was both the gentle friend from the playground and this impossibly powerful titan of industry. The sheer shock of the revelation was a seismic event in his soul. He felt a dizzying mix of disbelief, gratitude, and a profound, undeniable sense of hope. Serafina handled the manager with cool, efficient grace, then turned her full attention back to Leo. Her commanding demeanor softened, and the warmth returned to her eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice a quiet murmur meant only for him. He could only nod, his throat too tight for words. She gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Come with me," she said, leading him away from the gawking crowd, through a private door, and into a sleek, silent elevator that whisked them upwards. They stepped out into a breathtaking penthouse suite, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the entire city. Polished marble floors, ornate furniture, and priceless art adorned the room. It was a palace in the sky, a world so far removed from his cramped, water-stained apartment that it felt like another planet. She led him to a pair of plush armchairs near the window and, with a practiced ease, poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal carafe. She handed one to him, her fingers briefly touching his. The simple gesture grounded him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the city lights beginning to twinkle below them as dusk settled. Finally, he found his voice. "Why?" he asked, the single word filled with a universe of questions. "Why did you do all of this? The money, the food, and now this?" Serafina looked out at the city, her expression thoughtful. "Because you showed me something I thought was extinct, Leo," she began, her voice soft and sincere. "In the park that day, I was at my lowest point since my husband died. I was lost, broken, and convinced the world was a cold, selfish place. And then you appeared. You, a man who clearly had so little, offered me everything you had with no expectation of reward. You gave my son your child's food. That single act of selfless kindness, it saved me. It reminded me that there is still good in the world. I didn't want to just repay you. I wanted to restore you. I wanted the world to see you the way I see you." Tears glistened in his eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming, cathartic release. All the pain, the struggle, the quiet desperation of the past few years seemed to wash away in that moment, replaced by a profound sense of being seen, of being valued. "You are the angel," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "The anonymous charity. It was you all along." She gave a small, sad smile. "I just opened a door. You're the one who has the talent to walk through it." He looked down at his hands, the calloused hands of a chef, hands that had been idle for too long. He was being given not just a job, but his life back, his passion, his purpose. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. He looked up at her, and in her eyes, he saw not a billionaire CEO, but the lonely woman from the park, the grieving widow, the kind friend. He saw a reflection of his own pain, his own longing for connection. The bond they had forged over shared grief in the quiet playground felt more real, more powerful than all the wealth and status surrounding them. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city. She came and stood beside him. "The job is yours, if you want it," she said quietly. "No pressure. It's a real offer. You're more than qualified." He turned to face her, the city lights creating a halo around her. "I want it," he said, his voice firm with a newfound confidence. "Thank you, Serafina. You've given me back my future." A palpable energy shifted between them, the comfortable warmth of friendship deepening into something more. The unspoken attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface of their shared grief now rose to the forefront. She saw in him not a project to be saved, but a partner, a man of quiet strength and profound goodness. He saw in her not a powerful benefactor, but a woman of deep compassion and a strength that matched his own. "There's more," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Our connection. It's not just about gratitude for me, Leo." He took a step closer, his heart pounding a wild, hopeful rhythm. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "It isn't for me either," he confessed. In that moment, with the entire city spread out beneath them like a carpet of jewels, all the barriers of wealth and circumstance vanished. They were just two people who had found each other in the darkness. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, a tender, sacred kiss that was both a promise and a homecoming. It was the resolution, a romantic fulfillment born from the ashes of their shared sorrow. Their love was real. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the large bay windows of a stately, yet warm and inviting living room. The heavy fog of the past had lifted, replaced by a clear, bright sky. Laughter, pure and joyful, echoed through the house. On a soft, cream-colored rug, 4-year-old Lily and 2-year-old Gabriel were building an impossibly tall tower of wooden blocks, their small hands working in tandem. Lily, with her mother's dark hair, carefully placed a final block on top, and they both clapped with delight as the tower stood firm. The room was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and roasting chicken, a comforting, domestic aroma that spoke of home and happiness. This was their perfect, idyllic life. Leo stood in the archway of the kitchen, a clean white apron tied around his waist, a dusting of flour on his cheek. He was smiling, a genuine, soul-deep smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. The haunted, weary look was gone, replaced by a look of contentment and peace. He was no longer just a survivor. He was thriving. As the executive head chef of Serafina's global hotel chain, he had revolutionized their culinary programs, earning critical acclaim and several prestigious awards. His creativity, once stifled by desperation, now flourished. But his greatest success, his most profound joy, was right here in this room. Serafina entered from the garden, a basket of fresh-cut roses in her arms. She wore a simple sundress, her face relaxed and glowing with happiness. The armor of the CEO was shed at the door of this house. Here she was simply a mother, a partner, a woman in love. She saw Leo watching the children and came to stand beside him, wrapping her arm around his waist. He leaned down and kissed her, a familiar, loving gesture that spoke of a deep and abiding partnership. "Look at them," she whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "They're so happy," he nodded, his heart swelling with a love so immense it felt like it could power the sun. "We're all happy," he corrected her gently. It was true. The cavernous, sterile mansion she had once called home was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of a young family. The ghosts of their pasts had not vanished, but they no longer haunted the hallways. Instead, they were honored memories, the foundations upon which this new, beautiful life had been built. The blanket Maria had knitted was draped over the back of the sofa, a cherished piece of their story. A picture of Richard, smiling, sat on the mantel, next to one of Maria. They were all part of this family. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, their dreams filled with block towers and sunshine, Leo and Serafina sat on the veranda, a soft blanket shared over their laps. The night was clear, the sky a dark velvet cloth studded with diamond-like stars. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, a comfortable silence settling between them. They didn't need words to communicate the depth of their feelings. It was in every shared glance, every gentle touch, every quiet moment. They had healed each other, filling the hollow, shattered pieces of each other's hearts with a love that was patient, kind, and unwavering. From the depths of despair, they had built a sanctuary of love and security, a testament to the idea that even after the most profound hardship, a miraculous, love-fueled salvation was possible. Their happily ever after was not an ending, but a beautiful, ongoing beginning. This story is a testament to the profound and often unseen power of a single act of kindness. It serves as a universal fable, reminding us that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, the currency of compassion holds the greatest value. A desperate father, with nothing left to give, offered his last bit of comfort to a stranger, and in doing so, set in motion a chain of events that led not only to his own salvation but to the healing of another broken heart. It teaches us that true wealth is not measured in dollars or possessions, but in the strength of our character and our capacity to love, and that sometimes the person you choose to save is also the person who will end up saving you. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the goodness of people, we hope you will carry its message with you. Think about the small opportunities for kindness you encounter every day. A smile for a stranger, a helping hand for someone in need, an act of generosity with no expectation of reward. You never know when your small gesture might be the miracle someone else has been praying for, the single flicker of light in their darkest hour. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue creating these inspiring and heartwarming stories that remind us all of the magic that happens when we choose to lead with our hearts. We'll see you in the next one.